So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So today, inshallah, we're going to be continuing with the pearls of the Prophet ﷺ. Oh, sorry, I've got the wrong laptop. So today, inshallah, we're going to be continuing with the pearls of the Prophet ﷺ, and inshallah, we're going to be continuing with the subject that we had started some while back, and certainly, I want you to just, let's just zoom out a little bit and just see what we're doing, because I know I had several people contact me and say that they were really confused about how and where is this taking us. So what we're trying to do, I want you to zoom up. Let's just remember the page that we're on, okay? And what we're trying to do, certainly, we basically started out with speaking about the different things that we wanted the hadith to really help us, I guess, rebuild this connection, rebuild this relationship, but with understanding the hadith, understanding how we could see the way that the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us how to rebuild our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we wanted the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith, to really guide us. How can we connect to the Prophet ﷺ, to Islam, to the Wahi? So we basically were relating to the different hadith, but think of it as a quilt. Okay, think of it as a quilt. So we were starting with redirecting the vision. We went into, of course, from redirecting the vision, and this is the first patch within the quilt of letting the pearls. When you think of pearls, remember this. When you're thinking of pearls, just one pearl is not enough. You actually need to get a pearl and a pearl and a pearl in order to make a whole jewel. And that's what we're trying to do. Sometimes when you're connecting the pieces, all of a sudden, when you're fixated on one piece, it all of a sudden feels like, okay, so what am I doing here? What's the point? What are you trying to make? And that's the same thing, whether you're making a quilt or whether you're making perhaps a jewel, you always need to sometimes get fixated on small pieces and then connect those pieces together in order to get this redirection of a vision, redirection of a behavior, redirection of your spirituality. You want to keep in mind that the Prophet ﷺ, the main focus that he was teaching us teaching us in his words was, how do we let the Quran be a word that gives us the inspiration? How do we live that? What are the things that are going to be key things that will help us live this life, that the inspiration that we would find in al-Wahi is trying to tell us to live in? How do we put that in practice? That's the whole key thing. How do we put that in practice? Because definitely the Quran will give you certain notes. The Quran might give you comprehensive points, but then the Sunnah right there, the pearls of the Prophet ﷺ, will come in to help us connect these dots, connect these pearls together, patch them together in order for us to be able to put it on ground and not make it into a theory. Okay, and not make it into a theory. Not that we're saying that the Quran was giving us a theory, but certainly you will find that a lot of the things in the Quran are pretty comprehensive, sometimes ambiguous, simply because the Quran was telling you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed the Quran وَمِثْلَهُ مَعَهُ, and what was with it, which is the Prophet ﷺ, in order to help us understand how we would live this inspiration on ground, how we would put it into practice. So just keep that note in mind. And that's why we went into, okay, we were talking about redirecting the vision. Then we, of course, went into speaking about embracing what would redirect our vision, which is understanding what the vision is all about, which is Sharia, understanding how we could live the patience, how we could endure the time in the different, let's say, principles that we need to live in, and at the same time not get carried away with our emotions. We went with that. We also talked about al-iffa, that some things may be looking very tempting and intimidating to probably get out of the parameter of Islam. And sometimes we can give ourselves the interpretation that might sound sound and might not seem like you're doing something necessarily too bad. So then, without you realizing, you're going off the parameter. So we talked about what helps us see the parameter, what helps us see the borders, just to make sure we're identifying our positions, we're identifying the right and the wrong, we're able to distinguish the truth from falsehood, because many times it becomes really murky. And then we went into speaking about, well, how do we maintain when those situations that become very murky, how do we maintain our courage to stay within the parameter of Islam despite the opposition, despite all the things that we might be facing? We also talked about just the different quotes that explain the points that we were talking about, redirecting our vision. And then we also talked about redirecting our vision in embracing our life's purpose. So that was a very key thing that we talked about with different hadith. What are we supposed to be doing? How do we live our akhirah instead of our dunya? And we talked about some of the things that were telling us, giving us key things in order to tell us, well, how do you actually live the akhirah and leave the dunya? And we went in details, whether it's the two openings, remember when we talked about that, or whether it's getting more of the materialistic things than focusing on the inside. And then we went into, okay, so we get the idea that we're trying to redirect our vision, but how do we maintain our steadfastness? How do we maintain our steadfastness? How do we maintain our identity? And that's what we got into. First of all, in order to understand the identity, we needed to first understand what acts as an obstacle to many people and what acts as an obstacle and probably an area of slipping to get them off their identity. So that was a key thing in understanding, okay, well, what really gets many out of the parameter of Islam? So we talked about the different fitan out there. We also talked about al-ibtila, and certainly when we're speaking about al-ibtila, we're speaking about perhaps different calamities, different challenges that would be coming at you. And we talked about it. We're going to speak about, we're still not done, speaking about the different things that relate to steadfastness and so forth. But in order to understand those areas, we talked about some steadfastness on jihad, steadfastness on the path of truth, and we mentioned some of the things, but then in order to get and become practical in how to become steadfast in our deen, we went in details about, okay, there were certain key things to help you understand what you're supposed to be doing. Number one, knowledge in the religion, sincerity, following the sunnah. We went in details with some of those things, but then we're still not done. And we're right now taking one patch at a time with these points in order to scrutinize them and then go out again and scrutinize each and every single point and get out again and then connect. So this is what we're doing. So sometimes it feels like we're fixated on a topic and you're like, okay, I thought this was supposed to be something else. But remember, it's a patch. You would connect, it's a pearl. You would connect one patch and one pearl together, and then to make a complete quilt, to make a complete vision, to make this connection, you really sometimes have to take the time to really see, well, what does it mean to be sincere? How is it related to the big point, the big picture, which is redirecting your vision, redirecting your behavior, redirecting your own identity to be the identity that was the inspiration of the inspiration of the wahi, inspiration of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the Prophet ﷺ was telling you how to do it. So that's the whole idea. But we cannot necessarily just say, I want you to connect this patch and that patch and we're done, unless we really go back to the pearls of the Prophet ﷺ, the wordings themselves, in order to understand what the Prophet ﷺ was telling us to do in order to get this patch in place. We needed to go deep inside and understand what this patch even contains. Okay, or what this pearl contains, whether it's containing something that he's telling us, I want you to focus on the teachings that I had given you, the teachings that al-Khulafa after me had been capable to learn from me and even pass it on. And I want you to hold on to that like you would bite on it with your own molars. And I want you to be careful from all the different innovations, from all the different new things that might be coming in, probably with a new narrative, probably with a new interpretation. It might actually be presented like it's a modern way of saying things, but it's actually coming in with a completely different etymology, a completely different philosophy. It may seem attractive, it may seem like a nice rhetoric, but you want to keep in mind that the best interpretation, that the deepest and the closest interpretation to the Prophet's interpretation was actually the interpretation that was one done by the Prophet ﷺ, taught later by al-Khulafa, and later certainly the Sahaba themselves passed it on. We went in details, of course, in speaking about some of those areas and how we can learn Islam to make sure we're getting the right interpretation. So we said that there were going to be some challenges coming in to challenge that interpretation. So we needed to make sure we understand the al-adl, we understand the sabr. We basically would relate to, of course, relate to the hadith and relate to the understanding of Islam, making sure that we're going through the right foundations and the right resources and not confusing ourselves. We also talked about the friendship, part of the friendship, and we talked about how friendships and the right or the wrong friendship can affect our deen without us realizing. And we said that different paths are usually influenced by the people that are around us. And we went in some details with that, but there was really a lot more to say. When we talked about, and we said we're going to come back to it, we talked about the friendship in how most people would actually get off the path as a direct influence from usually the friends, usually the peers, usually the environment that you would surround yourself with. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ was giving us that certain people, certain things, you just have to take the decision to just leave them, to just ostracize yourself from them, and not necessarily think that I have to be with everyone. Because the second that you're with everyone, that actually means you had become so fluid that you're not capable of distinguishing your own parameters, because you don't have a specific shape. You don't have this identity in place. So when you don't have this identity in place, you're just going to be so fluid in the way that you would relate with the people around you, that you will be just becoming friends with each and every single one. To become friends or is completely different than saying, well, do not friend. It doesn't mean become an enemy per se, but it just means that it's really important to recognize who we have within and who we put within our circle in order to make sure that our identity in place. And certainly in some of I guess some of what was necessary to talk about these pieces, it was important to talk about, well, how do we look at that impact and the steadfastness in faith in order to understand why are we even concerned about all of this? What does it lead us to? Because we were talking about identity, we're talking about, okay, well, with our identity, what are you really trying to get to? What are you trying, where are you trying to take us? Why is this even important to talk about? Why do we even have to have an identity? Why can't we just, hey, just live like everyone else? And we went in certain things and certain points, and we said, well, empowerment of believing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically gives that empowerment to his servants. We're not just talking about political power here, but we're also talking about that there is a certain law that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in this world. There's a certain fact. Yesterday I was sitting with a sister that was basically just confused about some things about women and how we understand women and why can't we I guess live and give women certain empowerment and all of that, and why even uh, live in a certain idea in regards to women. And there was this thing in where there are certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created in nature, and we just have to recognize that there are kun fayakun. It is what it is. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created reality, created things in nature, and you just have to embrace it, and you cannot challenge it. And that's what Islam is about. Islam is about letting you know what it is in order for you to know how to embrace it and how to connect to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created the world in order for you to go through that alignment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created within nature, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within the world, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created as the purpose that preceded the existence. You're not going to be battling nature. You're not going to be battling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because nature is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're not going to be capable of battling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there are certain things that you might want to wonder, well, why is it that women are physically weaker than men? Why can't women be physically as strong? And or why do women have to be the ones to get the babies? Why not the men? There are certain things that you have to keep in mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within nature. You can't change it, but you can embrace it. By embracing it, you're then embracing not only the physics of it, but you're also embracing all the psychology that comes within it. How do we know what psychology that comes within it? Well, that's why the Prophet ﷺ was there in order to teach us the Sharia and what roles we're supposed to be carrying within our social roles or within our psychology, how we would relate to all of that. Why? Because it's a mercy to you. It's a mercy to those that would embrace that will, that there is, remember, there's the تشريع التشريع الكوني, there's the تشريع, sorry, الكونية, there's a Sharia al-Kawniyya, or not Sharia al-Kawniyya, what was it that we talked about? What was it? المشيئة التشريعية and المشيئة الكونية. We said that there is the will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within nature, and there's the will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically had given within legislature. So why are we doing all of this? We're basically trying to connect the quilt pieces together, the pearl pieces together in order to recognize how do we embrace the mercy, how do we embrace that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give us that love and be content for us? How do we get that protection? How do we get that steadfastness to give us also when we are invoking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do we get our prayers answered? How do we stay within the parameter of a sound belief in a sound morality? And how do we contain all that within the society? How do we bring in the security? So we went in certain details to continue reading this quilt, and we talked about some of the obstacles, and we said what actually acts as the obstacle for many of us from getting to what we want right there, the main goal. This would basically, now we're scrutinizing further, and we said these are things that usually would be areas that would slow the process down, slow our ability, and certainly take us away from being those that are redirecting the vision, redirecting the behavior. Now you see the quilt getting together. We're trying to put it together in order to make sure and see, well, now we're getting perhaps what's making certain pieces for those pieces of quilts or for those pearls sometimes not stick to each other. So then we scrutinized certain things and said, okay, here we go. We're trying to put this treasure together now. We're trying to glue it. How do we glue it? Well, certain pieces you have to keep on, remembering that they will not glue if you're too extreme. They will not glue if you just want things your way and not redirect things based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way. So you have to just recognize that this piece glues based on a certain physics that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within it, and it's not going to glue because you want it to glue that way. You can't force it. If you force it, you're going to break it. You're going to break it, and then you're going to lose the key, beautiful treasures that you had in your hand because you thought that you could just force it to glue or force it to somehow connect with it, but it doesn't go your way. There's a certain method that you have to connect them in. And that's why we're talking about now, as we're connecting the patches, certain things, extremism, following desires, doubt, temptations, ignorance in the religion, feeling secure from deception, all those different things might actually come in. So we scrutinize how and what happens to us when we would follow our own whims. What does that, how does that come in? What does that look like? How can we protect ourselves from all of that? We went in certain details and we talked about 3 different things that would actually come in as saviors, as giving you this key salvation. And we talked about justice, whether during anger or during a moment of content. And we talked about moderation during poverty and during the time of when you actually have the wealth. And we talked about 3 things that would be considered as destructive. We talked about the different desires that might come in. We also talked about the person's shuh muta. We talked about that a person is just following their own selfishness. We also talked about arrogance and how that might come in order to get the person in this get intimidated that, hey, it's just you and you're the focus, you're the center. And then we talked about how that was related to the hawa al-muttaba, or to that area where we're letting our own desires control us. So we went in details with that, and we talked about the different areas that might actually act as key things that might let il-hawa itself continue. And we would think that this desire, even though it's controlling us, but then we might actually live in a misconception and not realize that what resulted in our own arrogance was really a misconception. So we went into discussing misconceptions and where those misconceptions are coming from. So we definitely talked about the different narratives. We talked about some of the things about postmodernism, which is the kufr, which is the misconception, let's say machine during our times. So we talked about that misconception machine that is postmodernism and how it's all about considering that everything anyways is founded on absurdity. Therefore, there's no purpose. You would create your own purpose. And then, of course, that founded existentialism. And we also talked about the different methods that are used, which basically is creating a narrative that's all based on emotions, not necessarily the rationale behind it. And we talked about that and how it's relating to the ayat and how this method was not actually new. This was the satanic, diabolical agenda throughout history. And right now, it basically just has, I guess, the tools to let it get instilled and get the masses further confused in being able to distinguish right from wrong. You've got the politics, you've got the money, you've got right now the media, you've got right now AI is coming in to really confuse things. Somebody can make my voice, take my voice and then make me and just use my voice and basically make me say things that are completely opposite. It's nothing but magic, it's so confusing. And it can happen where it becomes so deceiving. So we went in details and talked about رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا. Ya Allah, don't let our hearts get shifted away after you had given us the guidance. We talked about guidance and we talked about why the place, and that's another piece within that quilt, the place to keep your focus, your vision is actually in the heart. But then what affects the heart? What affects our ability to process? And then we went in details in talking about, well, behaviors are basically the tools. The tools are basically your ears. They're basically your eyes. They're basically the brain. They're basically the things that you probably might say, what you walk to, all the different things that might surround you. And then your heart becomes the area that processes all of that. And without you realizing, the misconception can be not necessarily coming from probably a misunderstanding per se, but at many times it comes from the processing of the different things that your mass machine had basically brought in. The ingredients are coming from what you had looked at, what you had heard, what you were talking about, what your brain was processing, and then all of those ingredients, they become cooked within your heart. And we went in details with that, and we talked about how, well, the key thing in order to redirect your behavior, you want to redirect your heart, you got to redirect your behavior. What does it mean to redirect my behavior? What it means is that you have to live a certain sabr. So now we're going back to the key point, which is, remember, key points are adl, sabr, iffa, and shaja'a. Key points are adl, recognizing justice; two, living that endurance, living the patience; three, living the satisfaction despite the temptation that you might give yourself. You might give yourself the interpretation that it's fine and it's not going off your Islamic perimeter. And number five, how to live, of course, that courage, even though there might be fear, but you're still laying that foundation that you're not concerned about this dunya, and you recognize that the legacy that you're living for is the akhirah and not this dunya. That's the whole thing that we're trying to get to. And then we would look into the ayat or the hadith to really help us go further in a further understanding. Well, what does that mean? What are the ayat trying to tell us? Because you want to keep in mind when the ayat or the hadith would say certain sentences, for somebody that is looking and just reading and skimming through the words, it's saying the same thing. Like, it's not saying the same thing. It's not saying the same thing. It's so intricate that it's actually giving you important, intricate and important details that you really have to look closely in order for you to recognize the difference between this ayah and that ayah, this hadith and that hadith. It's definitely giving you the same idea that it's the akhirah that matters, and that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, key ideas. It's telling you, well, الآخرة خير وأبقى. We're done. الآخرة is خير وأبقى. How do I actually live that الآخرة is more important? الآخرة is everlasting. الآخرة is the place of your focus and not the dunya. How do I live that? How can I make sure that I don't fall in the different things that will redirect my vision, redirect my behavior, redirect my heart, redirect my principle? That's the whole thing about our class. It's trying to go deeper in seeing, well, whether we're speaking about sabr, whether we're speaking about obedience, and what that basically means to live a dhikr. And we went in details. We talked about visual dhikr. We talked about oral dhikr. We talked about behavioral dhikr. We also talked about the dhikr, that audio dhikr. And there's all of those types of dhikr that would redirect your vision to either a place of a principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rabbani, or Dunyawi. Is this a person that is centered around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is this person centered around dunya? Where and what is the center for that person? And that's going to be determined based on the dhikr that they would actually indulge in. The dhikr itself is really redetermining and determining what you are and how you engage in this dunya. It's not just redetermining your behavior, but it's even going to be determining your own psychology. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us, well, to redetermine your psychology, to redetermine what you are on the inside, you really have to make the choice. Are you going to be following Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance and basically find yourself away from delusion and away from the different implications of delusion? Well, what's the implication of delusion? The implication of delusion is that you're going to be living in a struggle. You're going to be living in struggles and trying to get things sorted out because you decided, you determined to challenge what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within nature. There's no way. It is what it is. Kun fayakun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the world. You cannot challenge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's المشيئة التشريعية, المشيئة الكونية, sorry. There's the will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in this nature, but then there's المشيئة التشريعية. المشيئة التشريعية, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you that there are certain wills that He had given you. You just have to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's when you're going to see things coming into basically in your favor, coming in supporting you. And that's why we went in details. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those that would put the effort in living the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will basically be guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we went in details with that. And we talked about Ibn al-Qayyim and what he had basically said, that the main place that will redirect or direct our vision is going to be in our heart, and our heart is basically cooking what we had basically either lived الشهوات or الشبهات. We went in details with that. Quran comes in to take away the different misconceptions. Quran comes in to help us recognize how to live within the halal parameter, within a parameter that is basically what is key for our survival. But then we may be intimidated to get into more and more of probably that feeling of desire and growing, the sense of some form of living an exotic feeling, and going into some form of engaging in entertainment, and the list goes on and on. So in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know the parameters that are considered as a halal shahwa, as a halal lust, and between the haram lust, and how you can stay within those areas to maintain your heart. Then we wanted to say, well, continue, because remember we said we're going to talk about this, which is the environment. This environment is key because certain people, they simply are supposed to be out of your perimeter because they can act as an area that can confuse you, confuse your vision, and even get your intention redirected, can get your mind, your vision redirected, your hearing redirected, and what you're talking about redirected, and certainly without you realizing, your heart redirected. In the beginning, you might say, well, I recognize what this person is talking about is wrong. I disagree with them. But there are certain things that you may not recognize, that slowly your mind, your heart, your body is going to start adapting. You're going to start adapting to this new situation. And as human beings, you may not recognize that your body, just like animals, that we basically were built in to adapt to certain things, and whether it's environment, your skin basically adapts to the new environment. Your lungs will adapt to certain things. Your brain, your different things in your body, the changes in the ecosystem, they're like, okay, well, this changed. Now we need to adapt to something new. You'll see the people that are living perhaps on Mount Everest, their lungs, their lungs and the amount of air that they're capable of taking in, or the people that would be, I believe it was in some area in near New Zealand, that they're capable of diving in for longer times than the normal human being, the average human being. Why? Because they basically adapted to a new situation. And sometimes even with the hearing, they'll basically, I guess, they'll literally pierce their ears inside to make them capable of diving in even farther in the waters and all of that. You start, seeing that people are capable of adapting to newer environments, to different environments that average human beings cannot actually do. But that's because we just recognize that our own body, without us realizing, can do its own job to adapt to new situations. But here's one thing. Sometimes such adaptation is not necessarily healthy for you, but your body is needing to adapt to it just because it was designed to adapt, but then you put it in the wrong area of adaptation. Your body was trying to give you, I guess, this fitra, but even the fitra itself can become contaminated. And from a fitra helping you distinguish from right and wrong, the fitra itself can get contaminated, and then it can be from a machine that is supporting you to help you adapt to the different things to keep you surviving. This fitra can get basically contaminated by the environment itself, and then our brain is living the misconception, and we're convincing ourselves that everything's fine. And what we're doing, we're basically getting into a completely new fitra, which basically is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us in. And we're making a new identity. And usually that's what actually can be one main reason, which is the adaptation to the people that might actually not be the ones to embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's key to recognize, well, how do we deal with these people? When do we get closer? When do we have to leave? Sometimes, أَلَمْ تَكُنْ أَرْضُ اللَّهِ وَاسِعَةً فَتُهَاجِرُوا فِيهَا. Sometimes, wasn't the earth vast enough and you had to find a new place? Sometimes, I have to even decide to leave. Ibrahim alayhi salam, at one point, he had to leave his own father, leave his own tribe, leave his own family, and it was time to leave. At one point, Lut alayhi salam, it was time to leave. And in fact, it wasn't just leaving. He was ordered to not even look back. Not even look back. Not even a gaze. And that's key. Sometimes it could be a temporary leave, and sometimes it has to be a forever leave, a permanent leave. You look at the Prophet ﷺ, it was a temporary leave. He left Mecca, even though Mecca is holier than Medina. But sometimes you have to leave an area that is actually safe, supposedly safe for you, the place that you grew up in, the place that was supposed to be that area that was supposed to be the safe haven for you, but you had to leave because what was more important, and what is more important than the safety for your body, is the safety for your deen. And this is key, especially for the younger generation, because the younger generation, especially girls, it's part of our psychology where we basically look for social acceptance. That's how, in our early childhood, adolescence, we basically would recognize something is right and wrong based on the people around us. Mom tells me this is good, dad tells me this is bad. I would then build in a structure on the inside that, oh, this can actually be dangerous. This can be scary. This can be not good. I can get in trouble for that. And then what happens? We build in, of course, within our psychology, that it's social acceptance. Once I get the praise, the endorsement from mom and dad in the beginning, that basically would make it that, okay, I got the endorsement. Mom said I was doing good job. She's clapping for me. I'm doing the right thing. But then, of course, when my area, let's say the environment, the area of social acceptance starts growing bigger. Now it's my friends. Now it's a society. Now it's social media. My area of friends, my area of environment is right now giving me a different, let's say, perimeter of acceptance. Now, what if this area of acceptance, whether it's the peers or whether it's the social media, is accepting me, following me for the things that are actually based on misconceptions? That's the dangerous part. What if it's the parameter that they are endorsing me for is based on a misconception? It's based on what is the opposite of al-mashia, المشيئة التشريعية? What if it's based off what is against the will of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had legislated? If it's against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had legislated, then it's going to be against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed within nature. But how do I know those parameters? How does this influence happen? And this is important to let our children, to let us understand that at many times with immaturity, that as a Muslim, you would become mature once you recognize that it's not people's endorsement that matters to you. It's not people's endorsement. It's not ridaness. It's not how people might accept you and appreciate you. It's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you recognize that most people are actually following deviance. So your focus shouldn't be whatsoever on how people would acknowledge or compliment or endorse what I do. That as a Muslim, you're going farther in your vision, in your maturity, to recognize that my place of focus is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a mature person. A mature person recognizes that even if all the people were to embrace and follow you, or you would see the celebrities, the most thing that they would want is just not to be recognized anymore. Because whenever these followers are coming at them, they're not given their spaces anymore. These celebrities, these fans that are coming at these celebrities, they just become an obstacle. At one point, they thought that having these fans was going to give them more acceptance, and it was a plus. Later on, you would see those celebrities, the most thing that they don't want is just to freely walk down the street without needing to have these bodyguards and these people that are just trying to keep them somehow live a normal human being. Now, this is key, that for the Muslim to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your place of endorsement. That's why radiyallahu anhum. This is key. Radiyallahu anhum. We want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be content over us. We want to be mature where we recognize that sincerity to only want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala endorse what you had done, because that's what matters. Human endorsement doesn't matter. People accepting you, it doesn't really matter. Sure thing, it might give you some perhaps social acceptance, definitely can lead to some empowerment within this dunya. They'll have a word probably in people's hearts. It would mean that they have some kind of power, and it would mean that they're going to be heard, etc. But then without us realizing, we can get sucked in. Without us realizing, such social acceptance, perhaps it might give us some empowerment. Some people, and specifically certain cultures, but this is really in all cultures, living a fake identity, faking richness, faking intelligence, faking power, faking, power, authority, or faking that you are of a certain social status. Sometimes that fakeness that they would be living in, it's really because of their fear. So they come in trying to convince the masses that they're actually rich. So when they blend and probably, amongst each other, probably making I don't know, a party or anything like that. It's trying to show you that I'm smart. I basically managed to get the areas solved, and I managed to basically know how to do this. Or I'm richer. Here's what I can afford. Here's how my clothes, this is a name brand, and my shoes, this is a name brand. I just want you to just feel that somehow I'm a person of power. It's all fake. They know it's fake, and it's going to be at the expense of their own rida, at the expense of their own content. But to them, what they think is important is just to live that fakeness in order to get some level of power. But in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling us that one key thing to stay away from in order to live al-rida is al-ikhlas, sincerity. Sincerity is key. Don't live and wear things that are mutashabbi' bima lam yu'ta. What does that look like? Well, it looks like the person is really wearing a garment which doesn't really suit them. It's a completely different size. But then they would wear it thinking that, ew, it gives me some power. Just because it's a bigger size than your size and it's probably more expensive, it doesn't mean that it's going to make you seem richer. You just wore something that doesn't belong to you. You just wore something that is not your size. You think that it makes you appear richer, but it just doesn't suit you. So what really matters is rida on the inside. Are you comfortable with that? Are you right there, comfortable with what you're practicing? How do I get with that comfort in what I'm practicing? There's no way unless you would live the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala built you within a fitra. What is that fitra? Fitra is, consider it like a thermometer. Consider it like, let's just call it a principle meter. And what this principle meter, every person has it. Kafir has it, Muslim has it, and they would feel guilty. So this guilty feeling, the feeling of guilt is right there giving you kind of like this alarm ringing, and this alarm that would ring would basically help you recognize that this is going on the other end. Guess what? Even animals have that. If you were to put, I guess, a tray of food for the cat, it would come in and recognize that, well, you put it for it. But then if it wants to steal something, it would steal it and run away. It recognized that it was basically snatching something that it doesn't belong to it. It recognized a perimeter of belonging, property, a certain area of justice and injustice. And even animals would recognize that's the perimeter of justice and injustice. And that's why they would even attack one another, because they would consider that I have to build an area of support. I have to make sure that I am living to support, whether it's my territory or support my right. This was a food I found first, and you'll see the squirrels fighting over, I guess, a walnut or whatever it is, and they would recognize justice. Oh, it's not just animals, but it's human beings. There's a certain fitra. It's basically kind of like that meter within you that is built inside of you to help you recognize sometimes where those meters are. But the meter, rida, within you cannot whatsoever contradict the rida of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The rida Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rida Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is key because then you would live the principle. The principle is actually the fitrah. The fitrah is going to be that parameter that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had let you identify and distinguish within Sharia. Now, Ahl Shar are one key thing that might let that meter, that built-in meter, which is basically al-fitra, can sometimes act as an area that can alter and completely alter your fitra. It's basically living within a certain environment. It sounds intimidating because it feels like you're getting social acceptance. It feels like you're getting empowerment. But the truth of the matter, it's nothing but a mirage. It's nothing but getting you out of what will make you content. It's getting you out of what will make you happy, because what you will not realize is that Ahl Shar themselves are actually living just for their sake. It's living the selfishness, it's living the dunya, it's living a certain level of feeding, or there isn't a certain level, there's really no level of feeding their entertainment, feeding their shahawat, and of course letting those shubuhat basically confuse those parameters. So let's just see what the ayat first and then the ahadith that tell us about mukhalatat ahl shar. I hope this quilt and this jewel that we're trying to build is clear, because it's important that we're to be on the same page. And for us to be on the same page, I have to keep going back over and over again and explain where we're going, because with this repetition, it's important to keep in mind that dhikr also comes, dhakara can mean to remember, dhakara can mean to mention, dhakara can mean to repeat. Okay, just keep that one in mind. Dhakara can mean to repeat. So when you repeat certain things, it's not always necessarily wrong, but sometimes it's to put you within the parameter. To repeat certain things is to keep you in alert and in focus. So you would repeat again and again. Let's see. Let's look at those ayat. Number one, وَقَدْ نَزَّلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الْكِتَابِ أَنْ إِذَا سَمِعْتُمْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ يُكْفَرُ بِهَا وَيُسْتَهْزَأُ بِهَا فَلَا تَقْعُدُوا مَعَهُمْ حَتَّى يَخُوضُوا فِي حَدِيثٍ غَيْرِهِ إِنَّكُمْ إِذًا مِثْلُهُمْ. This ayah is, let's see, and it has already been revealed to you in the scripture that when you hear the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being denied and ridiculed, do not sit with them until they engage in another conversation. Indeed, you would then be like them. I want you to keep this ayah in focus right there. When you look at نزل عليكم في الكتاب, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed it in what scripture? Well, whether that's the scripture within Al-Quran or whether throughout the scriptures, that there's a certain behavior, there's a certain principle that we're supposed to be living in order to protect us and protect our shubuhat and shahawat. Because shubuhat are also coming from Ahl Shar, from those people that are basically evil. So let's see. أَنْ إِذَا سَمِعْتُمْ, if you were to hear the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being, of course, denied or ridiculed, well, just don't sit with them. حَتَّى يَخُوضُوا فِي حَدِيثٍ غَيْرِهِ, until they would engage in another conversation. What is the reason for the revelation for this ayah? So the reason for the revelation for this ayah is that certain Sahaba, they had converted to Islam, and their homes were in the Jewish quarter or the Jewish neighborhoods, and other Sahaba, they were still, of course, living within the neighborhood, of course, the non-Muslim neighborhood, basically the mushrikeen, and then what that was leading to, of course, they were feeling rather isolated. How am I going to be part of all of this, and at the same time not be part of all of this? Because of course I'm going to be selling, buying, I'm going to be living with them, I'm going to be living around them. What am I going to do? I'm going to basically get isolated, and with isolation, that means I'm not going to be doing anything because they themselves are going to isolate me. And of course, my home is there. My kids are going to school with them. I'm basically eating, drinking. That's my neighborhood. That's my people. How am I going to separate myself from them? So they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, our homes are there, our neighborhood. They were Jews at one point. Now they embraced Islam. So now they're really confused at how to live within that society. So that's when the ayah was revealed to let them know that there are certain areas that if they're engaging in speaking against the ayat, or they're ridiculing the ayat, you just have to get up. Show that you're not accepting this. And it's not just laying out a political statement, but it's also protecting your faith. That no, if you're these types of people that are going to ridicule the religion or speak against the religion, then I'm not going to be surrounding myself with such talk or even such people. Because not will down the road, they might have their influence on me, but even me, I'm showing that I'm part of this conversation. I have to leave until they would basically change the subject, or I would let them know that when I'm around, I'm not going to accept such talk. That when I'm around, I'm going to be in defense for the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because if you don't do that, then innakum idan mithluhum. If you don't do that, then you're basically just going to start replicating their behavior without you realizing. Your body, your mind, you are going to adapt to such conversations, and it's going to be basically you down the road. You're going to be like that, and you're going to be influenced. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us, وَلَا تَتَّخِذُوا آيَاتِ اللَّهِ هُزُوًا. Teaching our children, teaching ourselves. There are certain jokes that people might say, think of it as funny. Probably talking about the religion, probably talking about Islam, probably talking about the malaika, and think of it as funny. This is part of اتخاذ آيات الله هزوا. This is mocking the religion, and this in itself can get the person out of the fold of Islam itself and within the fold of hypocrisy. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching us, قل إنما حرم ربي الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن والإثم والبغي بغير الحق وأن تشركوا بالله ما لم ينزل به سلطانا وأن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون. And say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had prohibited immoralities in what is apparent, what you might recognize, and what is not apparent, in perhaps something that might not seem so obvious to you. And of course, and والإثم والبغي بغير الحق. And the Lord Almighty had basically prohibited, whether we're speaking about things that are not apparently or at least clear to you that they're sin or that they're actually wrong, or sins that might be obvious to you, or oppression that you might give yourself the justification to transgress such a limit because it seemed like it was going to support your power, going to be in your favor. But the Lord Almighty said that no, those are certain parameters, whether we're speaking about an apparent sin or a sin that doesn't seem so apparent to being a sin, or whether it's a transgression against somebody's rights, or whether it's to associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those are all key parameters that you have to maintain. And also, وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, or to say things against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of what you don't know. In other words, we're looking at maintaining that area, what you're talking about, and certainly what you're engaging in and what you're surrounding yourself with. Well, that's why the Prophet ﷺ was telling us of different people that you should or you shouldn't surround yourself with. And he said, مثل الجليس الصالح وجليس السوء كحامل المسك ونافخ الكير. فحامل المسك إما أن يحذيك وإما أن تبتاع منه وإما أن تجد منه ريحا طيبة، ونافخ الكير إما أن يحرق ثيابك وإما أن تجد منه ريحا خبيثة. The Prophet ﷺ said, the example of a good companion and a bad companion is like that of a bearer of musk, selling fragrance, and the one who blows the furnace. The bearer of musk will either give you some of basically the fragrance, or you will buy from him from that fragrance, or at least you'll smell the fragrance from him. As for the one who blows the furnace, he will either burn your clothes, or you will basically blows the furnace, meaning the chimney. Okay, that's what they used to do. Or those that would basically نافخ الكير, they would remember they would basically create, it looks like like those old cartoons, they would basically start pressing on it to blow in the fire, so they will end up getting either their clothes burned or probably smell the burnt coal or the burnt fire that was basically on their clothes. And as a result, in the end, it's going to be coming at you regardless. And the Prophet ﷺ was giving this, I guess, simile to just let us recognize that the person and what they do is going to start later on affecting their smell, affecting their words, affecting what they carry. And this will become later on rubbing onto you without you realizing. So you have to choose who you're surrounding yourself with, because at the end of the day, it's basically going to change your identity, your smell, your thoughts, who you are. You have to determine who you are by determining your friends. Let's continue the ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ تَفَرَّقُوا وَاخْتَلَفُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمُ الْبَيِّنَاتِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and don't be like those who had been divided and deferred away from the clear proofs that had come onto them. So what does it mean that they were divided? Divided into what? Well, we've got Muslims, we've got, the different types of Muslims, we've got all these different groups right now of Muslims. What do we mean by that? Tafarraqu doesn't necessarily mean divided per se, but it can actually mean to be away from. So tafarraqu anil Quran, tafarraqu anil Sunnah. In other words, it's not divided, but it's separated away from. It's to basically leave. It's to consider the Quran as not applying to you. So tafarraqa an would actually mean to depart, to mean that you are opposing such a lifestyle without you realizing, or maybe with you realizing. وَاخْتَلَفُوا, and then this would create, in the beginning, they basically chose a different practice. But later on, اختلفوا. This affected their brain and how they process the idea. So in the beginning, it became a shahwa, and later on, it became a shubha. And this is important to keep in mind. Yes, the shubha can become and generate a shahwa. A shahwa can later on generate a shubha. A lust can later on generate different misconceptions out there. In the beginning, it started out just basically normalizing certain behaviors. And well, certain people might have different orientations, and then without us realizing, they would generate a certain misconception, and then they're basically going into min ba'di ma ja'ahumul bayinat, they're going into a complete confusion after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically clarified the truth for them, and they're just completely lost. That's why the Prophet ﷺ says, Al-mar'u ala dini khalilih, falyanzuru ahadukum man yukhalil. We talked about this one before. A person is on the religion of who they befriend. So let one of you look at whom they take as close friends. Let's see, in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ was telling us, well, one key thing that most friends are really joining together for in order to create a sense of acceptance, a sense of endorsement, a sense of somehow feeling that they fit in, a sense of belonging. So the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَنظُرُ إِلَى صُوَرِكُمْ وَأَمْوَالِكُمْ وَلَكِنْ يَنظُرُ إِلَى قُلُوبِكُمْ وَأَعْمَالِكُمْ. For the Lord Almighty doesn't look at your appearances and doesn't look at your wealth and what social status you probably have right there. But the Lord Almighty looks at your heart and looks at the actions and what you embrace within your heart, and certainly what your actions would basically reveal of what the truth of your identity is. And this is key, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not looking for something that is fake. People want you to be fake because you recognize that if you were to probably appear in an image that probably does not fit the category of wealth that they were having in their mind, or probably a certain beauty or a certain, let's say, image, that in order to fit in, you needed to, I guess, blow up certain areas in your body. You needed to shape your eyebrows in a certain way. You needed to wear certain types of clothes. You needed to appear in a certain way in order to fit in and really appear like you are up to date with fashion. You are just elegant. You just know how to choose your clothes. You know how to choose your style. You're really fit in. You really are up to date with everything. So in that situation, of course, you just realize that these people are not really looking at your qulub and your actions and your principles. These people are just looking at what they consider is important. Just an outer fake appearance of showing social status and showing a certain appearance and fitting in within their community, because it's all based on fakeness anyways. So they're faking it, and they're expecting that, hey, this is our area of competition. Let's all fake it. But they don't want to admit that they're faking it, because they want you to get convinced that no, it resembles power, it resembles authority, intelligence. It just resembles that I managed to get to understanding the key of success. So you got to believe that I'm somehow better than you. So what do we live in? We live in fakeness. Live in fakeness. But for Salihin, they recognize that whether it's the appearance or whether it's the wealth and the social status, that's not what makes a person really deserve the endorsement, really deserve the importance, but it's really al-qalb عند العمل. It's really the actions and the heart that really makes them have this importance. This endorsement from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what really matters. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us, لا تصاحب إلا مؤمنا ولا يأكل طعامك إلا تقي. Do not associate except with a believer, and let no one eat your food except one who is conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me reiterate the translation. لا تصاحب إلا مؤمنا, meaning do not company yourself except with a believer. Does that mean if somebody is not a believer, I say, I'm sorry, are you a believer? Oh, you're Christian? Okay, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be eating with you today. It was nice talking to you. You can go now. No, that's not what we're saying. We're not saying that. We're basically here, لا تصاحب إلا مؤمنا, to basically recognize that the person that you would company, the person that you would associate with most of the times, is going to be a believer. And لا يأكل طعامك إلا تقي, and only a person that is embracing taqwa. What's the difference between المؤمن and التقي? Why didn't he say لا تصاحب ولا تأكل إلا مع تقي? المصاحبة is a day-to-day thing. We're probably going to school together. We're probably shopping together. We're probably just doing different things. Okay, that's I know, Noura, you're raising your hand. Just give me a second, dear. So لا تصاحب إلا مؤمنة. المصاحبة is a day-to-day thing. أكل الطعام is basically to eat. It's a specific engagement. A specific engagement. You want to make sure that the person that you would do these specific engagements, perhaps when we're speaking about لا يأكل طعامك إلا تقي, you would eat with a taqi. What does that mean? Well, there are specific engagements. For example, if you're wanting an advice, don't go for any Muslim. You want to make sure that this Muslim that you're seeking advice from is a person that is a mu'min. You're making sure that, or is a taqi, has ilm. If you're seeking advice, make sure that this person has ilm. If you're probably wanting to get married, then make sure this person is living their life. You're going to scrutinize their life to make sure that they're really living their life based on iman in each and every single corner, personal and social life, that it's based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are we doing? We're scrutinizing depending on the amount of association. We're scrutinizing how much of iman do I really want of them. And this is key. That's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he talked about marriage, he said, إِذَا جَاءَكُم مَّن تَرْضَوْنَ دِينَهُ وَخُلُقَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ. If you would get a proposal from somebody that has the deen and the morality, then get them married. Why? Well, why did he emphasize al-akhlaq? He was emphasizing al-akhlaq because the person's character. The person might be of good religion, but they might be stingy. They might be perhaps sir thing, just an arrogant person, a narcissist person, and just a person that is so selfish. That's an akhlaq, definitely a morality that contradicts faith. But then when it's a marriage, when this dynamic is within marriage, we have to definitely bring a special emphasis in a special scrutiny to make sure that this person is a person that really lives in good character, in good personality, in practicing what would make good company within the dynamic of a family. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was telling us a key thing. And he said, look at this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ was saying, I guarantee a house in the outskirts of paradise for the one he leaves off arguing. Even if he's right, and a house in the middle of paradise for the one who leaves off lying, even if he's joking, and a house in the highest part of paradise for the one who has good manners. I want you to look at this one. The Prophet ﷺ was basically telling us right there, لِمَنْ تَرَكَ الْمِرَاءَ وَإِنْ كَانَ مُحِقًّا. Some people, they just have this habit where even if they might agree with you, they just have to find something to argue about. And they just have to somehow just say, I'm different. And it becomes, along with this kind of a conversation, to say, I'm different, is that they're trying to put you down. And of course, trying to find faults, even though you probably might agree with them, but they're just constantly, what comes with it is that they're constantly arguing, they're constantly disagreeing, they're constantly complaining, they're constantly trying to find faults in what you're saying, just because they want to find a way to put you down in order to go up on your back. They're just trying to go up by putting you down. You know, exactly what they would describe as a narcissist person, because that's so ugly. That is so ugly, to somehow think that your arrogance and that somehow you are better than others and that you always have everything right and that you just have to prove that everyone else is of less intelligence, everyone else is of less commitment, of less in their faith, and exposing people's sins, exposing people's faults, exposing people's mistakes in order to say, well, I'm not like that. That is so toxic. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ was actually saying, hey, leave such a behavior, even if you're right. Sometimes you just have to know when to stay silent, when to not necessarily engage in an argument, and just let the space for others to sometimes, the conversation is not an issue of getting information. You know, when you look at the ayah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Prophet Musa, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا Musa, what's in your right hand, Musa? And Musa, alayhi salam, it's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't know what's in his right hand. He wanted to be more conscious of it because he wanted to say, hey, you see that? What's in your hand? What's in your hand? Tell me what's in your hand. Well, it's a stick, it's a cane. And I would do this and this and this and this with it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now that you recognize it, now look what I'm going to do to it. And then boom, it turns right there into a snake. Now, what you thought you had complete knowledge about, you want to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overcomes your knowledge and overcomes your power. And what you thought you were holding is right now in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. What you thought you were so aware of, now this is what you lack in that awareness and what it can become in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. But Prophet Musa alayhi salam was so keen to holding a conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said, it's just asai and ahushu biha ala ghanami and you know, going into the details of what he would do with. And then at the he could have just said, it's asai, it's my cane. But he went in details because he wanted to prolong the conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But looking at that, وَإِن كَانَ مُحِقًّا, and leaving lies, they would get a special status in Jannah. Why is it to leave lies? Because once you leave lies, then you're speaking about leaving and abstaining from all the different life of fakeness, whether fakeness in speech, fakeness in the way you present yourself, or the fakeness in the principles that you might live. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, وَإِن كَانَ مَازِحًا, never live in any lies, even if you were just joking about it. Because just teach yourself how to live the principle. And certainly by living that principle, then what you're doing, you're basically guaranteeing yourself that this is going to be the key to husn al-khuluq, the key to good morality. So how am I, if I'm going to leave the society, what am I going to do? I mean, am I going to be living isolated? Well, that's why the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us, well, you got to have that courage. من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده. You see what is wrong and what is evil. Well, then you got to change it with your hand. Of course, a metaphor to tell you with your power. If you have the power to do so, well, then do so. If you cannot, then engage with your tongue and with your words and orally change it. And that's the least of what you could do and the weakest thing in your faith. But you want to keep in mind that in engaging in all of that, إن الله يحب الرفق في الأمر كله. In another hadith, الرفق ما كان في شيء إلا زانه. What happened? The Prophet ﷺ was with the Sayyidah Aisha. A group of Yahud passed by and they said, Assalamu alayk. It wasn't Assalam, it was Assam. Assalamu alayk basically means they were, I guess, making it appear like they were saying Assalamu, but Sayyidah Aisha and the Prophet ﷺ recognized that they had actually not said Assalam, but they said Assam, which basically means death. So they were saying, death be upon you. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Alaykum kama qultum, and upon you as you had said. That's it. But he said that Aisha couldn't handle all of this. She was watching and she was like, she started basically coming at them and yelling and basically going at them. And that's when the Prophet ﷺ tells her, did you not hear what I just told them? And she said, well, didn't you, they were, this is what they said. They just, said something bad right there. And the Prophet ﷺ tells her, الرفق ما كان في شيء إلا زان. I just said, and upon you what you had wished for me. And that's basically the end of the story. To engage in such swearing and start yelling and all of that is basically going to be harming your image. It's going to be harming and affecting your heart. So make sure you don't get absorbed and carried away in their puddle, and because they're going to be definitely the ones to get into I guess taking you in their area of mud, and without you realizing, these people are just experts in swimming into these puddles. Don't get absorbed. Make sure you are smart to look beyond this area that they're trying to drag you in. Don't get dragged easily. And certainly don't get dragged. So, Inna Allah yuhibbu rifq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the gentleness in the matters. Be gentle. Know how to choose your area of battle. Even great people, they wouldn't mess with people that are not great. For example, you're looking at eagles. What does an eagle do? Well, when a hawk comes at them, what do? What does the eagle do? The hawk might come there, but the hawk could have just, probably fought it and probably somehow, I don't know, did their own battle with them to get them off. But no, what does the eagle do? The eagle just goes and flies high up and up and up at levels that the hawks are not capable of going high up in. They'll suffocate. It's too high up for them. So the eagle, what he does, he just goes up and he's like, you're not going to be capable of bearing the latitude that I'll be flying in. So what does the hawk go through? Basically suffocates, I guess, gets dizzy and just falls down. But all the this eagle needed to do was just let that hawk know that it was messing with someone that knows nothing but how to be high and how to be great, and you would not be capable of going up to their level. And this is extremely important. When people drag you down, don't get dragged down to their area of conversation. Let them know that you're a person of principle. Let them know you're a person that goes up to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not low to the levels of shaitan. You let them know your borders, let them know their borders, and let them know that you're a person of La ilaha illallah. And that's what it means to have that izzah. How do we get that izzah? How do we maintain such izzah? How do we learn all of that? Well, we learn it first with ilm. Two, certainly, إذا رأيتم الرجل يعتاد المساجد فاشهدوا له بالإيمان. Going to the masajid. You want to basically witness something. You want to, if you're seeing that person always connecting with the masajid, always connecting with the masjid, then that's one sign that that person is basically living in iman. So how do I know? You know, even though I was supposed to be looking into the level of authenticity for this hadith, but inshallah I'll get into it. But I want to mention this hadith, even though I'm in doubt of its authenticity. Okay, it was narrated by Ibn al-Mubarak. من لا يواسيك في نفسك ولا يرفعك في دينك فلا تصاحب. If a person is not giving you, فلا تصاحب, of course, do not be in company with a person that is not giving you the support in yourself, not elevating your deen, then don't associate with these people. You have to recognize that these are supposed to be outside of your area of what is important to you. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was telling us, al-mu'minu lil-mu'min kal-bunyan yashuddu ba'duhu ba'da. A believer to a believer is exactly like a building, like a brick, where one brick is supporting the other brick, and that's what keeps them pulled together. How do we get that support? Well, the first support is the support in iman. How do we make that support in iman? Support in iman. أحب لله وأبغض لله. They would love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would hate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَعْطَى لِلَّهِ وَمَنَعَ لِلَّهِ فَقَدْ اسْتَكْمَلَ الْإِيمَانِ. They would give for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that when they prevent, they don't want to give, it's basically for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those are the people that are centered around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those are the people that you want to center yourself with, because that actually makes the true love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in that hadith al-Qudsi, وَجَبَتْ مَحَبَّتِي لِلْمُتَحَابِّينَ فِي وَالْمُتَزَاوِرِينَ فِي وَالْمُتَجَالِسِينَ فِي. Want to look at this, that the love, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love is guaranteed for those that love one another for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those that would visit one another for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those that would sit together for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does it mean that they would love one another for the sake of Allah? What puts us together is really because we want to learn more about the Prophet ﷺ, about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because, and certainly if we had the money, we'll probably be visiting one another just to engage in conversations and about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about Islam, etc. And وَالْمُتَجَالِسِينَ فِي, and those that would sit together because they would want to support one another on the cause of Islam and for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And those are the types of people, نسأل Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us amongst those and to make us from those that would really be متحابين في الله, and maybe one day متزاورين في الله subhanahu wa ta'ala, and even متجالسين في الله subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is one of those quilts, one of those patches, and definitely one of those pearls. And inshallah, we'll continue next time. But there's really a lot more to say in regards to this topic. I know, Noura, that you wanted to say something, so I'll mute myself right here in order to listen to you.
Sorry, I just asked, sometimes when you're giving da'wah, you'll get like some comments, just because, they've been hearing propaganda or whatever, wherever resource they heard it from. But I mean, is that okay if you like keep giving them da'wah? Whether it's on social media or at a da'wah table?
Well, absolutely, Noura. To give them da'wah, that's even, of course. I mean, you have to give them da'wah even when you're dealing with these people. Absolutely, you're giving da'wah and you're trying to engage in that. But we're actually talking about creating a bond of relationship that is farther than da'wah. If it's a bond of relationship, but it can happen that we're probably making a bond of relationship, but the bond of relationship, we did this bond in order to probably create a path because at the end of the day, by كسب القلوب is your way to كسب المواقف. In bringing in the hearts closer to you, that's one way to bring in at least the argument to help them also listen to you. So by giving a smile, sharing food, etc., I'm just trying to create a path in order to bring your heart closer, in order for me to be able to do the da'wah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked me to do. So this is part of da'wah. This is part of Islam. That doesn't contradict what we were saying about in accompanying perhaps somebody that is mu'min, and sometimes I'm accompanying somebody because that's probably not a mu'min, but that's because I'm doing it because I'm trying to get them close to al-Iman. That's a different story. Sister Arwa, go ahead, dear. I believe you can unmute yourself. Am I right?
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam.
I have just kind of a question. I'm not trying to talk about it like the topic that we related to, but like how we can deal with the people like they say Muslim, but like when it comes to some maybe it would be like some rules about Islam, and then they don't believe it. Like they say, let me say, they're Muslim, right? They pray maybe 5 times a day, or they pray sometimes. But at the same time, like they don't have real belief about the qadr or about the hereafter. Even if we have like those people around us, like as a family, like would you recommend or how are you gonna reconcile with them?
Okay, so
Because
if I'm
like especially when it comes to aqidah, like for example, maybe they are like close relatives, but still they have like those mashakil. Yeah.
So if I'm understanding this right, when we're talking about perhaps people that may surround us and we're right there, probably I have no choice in separating myself away from, because probably their family, maybe in my classroom, etc. I don't have the ability to isolate myself from them. So it depends on this person, and when there's a difference between as-sama' and al-istima'. What's the difference? As-sama' is yes, I know someone is saying something, but I'm not tentative in what they're talking about. I'm creating somewhat of a distance. I'll say Salamu alaikum. I'll do mudara. Perhaps I'm not necessarily in best friends with that person. That is called al-mudara. And it's actually the sunnah with certain people. They might come at you and harm you. Certain people, I just need to create some distance, somehow, a separation, and even though they're there, but I know that they might harm me, so I'll just somehow create a distance and not necessarily a deep engagement. But at the same time, I will taking consideration, I guess the status that they're in, meaning if it's my mother, perhaps that I might need to keep distance from, that in that situation, I'll do my homework in at least being there according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling me to do to my mother. But if, she's still harming me, I will just learn how to create safe spaces for my heart, safe spaces for my mind, and at the same time do what I need to do based on what Islam was asking me to do. Same thing if we're talking about a brother or a sister. I'll say Salamu alaikum, probably attend maybe a halal wedding, or at least let's say a parameter that is permissible. Maybe if it's a haram wedding, I'll probably not attend when the haram things are happening. I'll just probably just keep that, let's say, connection by saying, well, Mubarak on, let's say, your maybe your wedding, etc. Somehow create a space just so that I could win the heart and not lose the heart. But at the same time, I'm trying to keep distance as much as I can, because once that influence is starting to influence my children, trying to influence me, and trying to harm my faith, then that's when I have to decide to create those spaces where it's very, I don't want to call it superficial, but I'll say it's very minimized. It's a very minimized relationship. I'll say Salamu alaikum. I'll probably say marhaba, or good morning, or hi, how are you, etc., just to maintain a relationship. But deep on the inside, I would know that they're actually in a different path than what I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to increase my iman, and they're living at a different lifestyle. But I'll just say hi. That's a completely different thing. It doesn't mean I'm an enemy. I'm not necessarily a close friend. I'm right there. I said hi. I'm not attacking anybody. I just said hi, but I'm not getting too close because they're not on the same page that I am in. You see what I'm saying? Okay, let's see. This sister saying, I know of people who are 5 daily prayers, indulge in fawahish, associating with non-mahram women. How can we reconcile this with a hadith of one who frequents the masajid? Good question. So we're speaking about one of those traits. Indeed, someone can go frequently to the masjid and not, or even be a hafidh al-Quran, or even be a alim and a scholar, but not necessarily live up to the principle. So those are different traits, but that's not the only trait. Okay, so a person can have ilm but not live the ilm. A person can have the dhikr but not live the dhikr. A person can be probably a hijabi but not really live the hijab. A person can be perhaps praying the 5 daily prayers but not act upon the 5 daily prayers. So those are things to help us recognize what can be a factor to help us become better beings, but it doesn't mean that every single person that's practicing a certain factor is necessarily a better being. That's a different homework. Okay. Sister Samira, go ahead, dear.
Assalamu alaikum. Sheikha, that was my question. So my other question is that no, I lost my train of thought with regards to the question that I just asked about it being a testimony to a person's faith. I forgot what I was going to ask there, but I have two other questions that I needed to ask you. And one was that how do we inculcate sabr in children so that they have sabr when they're older?
Outstanding question. How do we inculcate and build sabr within children? One key thing, there was this study in neuroscience that was actually studying if we are to give, let's say you wanted to reward your child for, let's say, for doing his bed. Okay. And you promised him if you were to do his bed, fix his clothes or whatever, that you were going to give him a cookie. This interesting study was suggesting that by delaying the reward for 15 minutes or even half an hour or probably a day, that's basically helping them in recognizing that the reward doesn't have to be instant. Thinking that they have to get a reward for each and every single thing that they do is actually dangerous, because they would think that every single behavior that I would do, I have to get a reward for it. If I don't, then it's not worth doing that good value. So sometimes delaying the reward is teaching them that the reward doesn't have to be instant, and that sometimes you have to expand your area of patience even in getting the reward, and even when you would give them these chores. Could be a simple chore: clean your bed, pick up your clothes, take the trash out, all these different chores. And the more chores you would give them, the more basically the more you would inculcate patience. What is patience? Well, patience is basically enduring a certain pain in order to get a certain gain. Okay? When we're speaking about enduring pain, whether we're prolonging the amount of pain or prolonging the amount of challenge, in how we basically let our let's say our emotions not get carried away with us, where we're letting our emotions recognize that no, you have to wait, you have to hold on, you have to endure. So that's one thing, in order for you to get the reward. But then enduring the patience, even when you're going to get the reward, you did the job. But then enduring the patience till you get the reward, that's another type of patience that we have to get them, learn. So whether it's pain, or whether it's chores that they're doing, or whether it's choices and decision making, that, hey, yes, this decision doesn't probably match what you would want happening, but you have to recognize that not everything goes based on what you think must go into and what must happen. So you have to engage. Are you controlling your your emotions right there? Are you holding your tantrum? One very important thing is probably timing them and showing them that, okay, when you got into this tantrum, it took you 20 minutes to snap out of your cries. Of course, it depends on from one age to another. Okay, you can't deal with a 7-year-old the same way that you would deal with a 15-year-old, but sometimes calculating the tantrum for them and say, okay, I'm calculating the time. I'm giving you this amount of time. Or sometimes, maybe you need to learn how to do that management, that emotional management, and probably sometimes teach them how to do that emotional management. Sometimes get yourself busy with something else. Maybe you need to go do wudu. Maybe you need to sit down. Maybe, I don't know, maybe have a punching bean, go and start punching on that bean that you probably have. Maybe you need to find something else to help you endure probably the anger that you're in. Maybe cook, bake something, fold your closet, or maybe go do the socks, or etc. All these different things. They can actually be things to help the child learn how to do, let's say, whether it's anger management or whether it's, let's say, emotional distress and how to live that sabr. It depends on the age group that we're talking about, but sometimes you also have to just be firm that, hey, whether you like it or you don't, you're not going to take what you want. And whether you wanted to do that anger management / emotional adaptation, well, maybe you just need to learn how to do it on your own. And you just have to be firm as a mother and say, you're not going to get what you want. And that's basically end of it. Suck it up, learn it, accept it. There's no other way. How you endure it is what I want you to learn, the different coping mechanisms in how you would recognize. And that's one key thing that I would say the traditional methods sometimes of parenting, or let me say sometimes the fatherly figure, is important, because mother is usually more capable of probably engaging in a conversation and trying to somehow think that, let me just convince this person, let me convince this little kid why it's important, give them the philosophy behind it. Dads don't do it this way. Just accept it. It is what it is, and just take it. And the child just takes it in and just learns how to, I have no choice, because dad said so. Sometimes this traditional method, hey, even when you look at Quran doesn't always give you the reasons behind why certain actions are good for you and why certain actions you have to do. It doesn't always give you that. It just tells you it is what it is. You have to learn how to adapt to it, and you have to basically recognize that not always do you understand the reasoning behind something, and not always does it have to match what you would want to happen. You have to sometimes bend your emotions, bend your desires, and certainly bend yourself to accept that mashi'a tashri'iyya. You have to accept sometimes the will of legislature from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes, there are certain moments that I would engage in explaining to the children why it's probably important to do things in a certain way and engage in a certain conversation, but it has to be within the parameters of adab. And what I mean by adab, that they would recognize that the parent, you cannot parent your parent. When you talk to your parent, you don't challenge their authority. Because in that situation, you're trying to parent your parent. But what you can, with adab, come forward and say, well, can I explain to you why I think the other idea is a good idea? Perhaps why it's a good idea to get a phone. And here's what I think. I promise to do this. I promise to use these regulations. Here's what I could add onto the phone. Here's what I could do to prove that I'm basically qualified enough, etc. And the father can look into the case. And they also have to understand that it's not always the same rule giving that I have to apply on everybody. Sometimes I've got a situation that requires a different law, perhaps pertaining to girls compared to pertaining to boys, or perhaps a law that, hey, you lost your privilege here, and he didn't lose his privilege there. And sometimes as a father or as a mother, sometimes we just have to let them know that there are certain restrictions, even if I may not be convinced with it, that I have the experience as a parent to let you know and understand that you're not mature enough, that your brain is not even developed enough to recognize where this is going in the long run, and just recognize, just as your brain is not fully developed and fully mature, neither are you in yourself fully mature to recognize why this is important. Some things come with experience, and it's not enough to just think of it as on a surface level. So some things you just have to recognize that as a parent, that it is what it is, and that this is what must be done. Not always do they have to be convinced. And that's where fatherly position comes in. Let's see, subhanAllah, but when you accept and open your mind, and when you realize that it's good and that it's for your own good, I agree. That's why it's, I would say mother and father can come in collaboration with one another. Motherly, I guess, position comes in, and sometimes fatherly as well, to come in and explain things differently. And I guess that fatherly figure sometimes comes in with power, motherly figure comes in with some level of compassion, and sometimes to engage in explaining to them why this is important, what's going to happen in the long run, and probably seeing those examples. And definitely sometimes we can do that, but sometimes they're just not convinced, because you want to keep in mind their brain is not fully developed, so they're not always convinced, and they'll bring about all these different examples of, my friend had the phone and she's doing just fine, my other friend had a phone and she's just doing absolutely fine. And your level, or at least your definition of what makes something fine and what doesn't make something fine, and what you're trying to get them to, is probably different than what their parents are. I don't have to use other people's standards and consider that that's a standard that I want to live up to. And then you would have to explain to them, but not always do they have to be convinced. And that's what you want to keep in mind. They don't always have to be convinced. Sometimes you just want to say, it is what it is. That's the standard that we're going to be following within our home. And that's what you're going to be applying. And that's what you're going to get, whether in terms of reward or whether in terms of punishment. And the punishment, yes, we're going to be taking away certain privileges. Because at the end of the day, you have to recognize you don't use the privilege that you were given in a way to basically be in your favor, then certainly that means you're not qualified enough to take that privilege. We're going to start stripping away certain privileges, and you're basically going to take away a lot of the taraf, a lot of the luxury. And little by little, they'll, inshallah, of course, in theory, it sounds so easy, but in practice, you want to keep in mind not every child is like another child, and every child is different, and no child comes with an instruction manual. At least I didn't see it in the placenta, but yeah. And you just have to figure things out, right? So do tell me if you did get any instruction manuals coming with the placenta. I'd love to learn more about this. All right. Subhanakallahumma hamdik, nastaghfiruka
Oh,
wa natubu
assalamu
ilayk.
alaikum.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Khadija, go ahead.
No. Yeah. How do we undo the case of a friend where they quoted when they don't wear the hijab, like wearing just a hat, and they quoted their hadith of saying Allah does not look at your appearance, He only looks at your heart and your action. What do you
So
think
you
about
want to
it?
keep in mind, most of the times the girls are struggling with things like hijab, for example, because they're trying to get social acceptance. Okay, so what I would recommend is changing the environment, probably changing the school, probably maybe changing even, I don't know, the country, whatever it is. Because girls, especially, they look for social acceptance, boys look for reward. Okay, so just keep that one in mind. So if she is basically losing the acceptance, she's not getting the boys looking at her, the girls looking at her, she's not getting the attention, then in that situation, she's going to look for different reasons that will get her the attention, whether it's putting makeup on, whether it's speaking in a certain manner, whether it's mimicking a certain celebrity. So because that's to her is feeding, I guess, her importance. And as women, it's, I guess, part of us where we want to feel important. We want to feel that other people are endorsing us. And usually within the women's world, it's always complimenting on your appearance. And certainly hijab becomes a struggle because it's complimenting on your appearance. And certainly when you're wearing hijab, that doesn't come in, even if it's an adult Muslimah, it really comes in with the same thing. It's always wanting. An adult Muslimah and a young girl, it actually comes in with the same, I would say the same psychology. It's wanting to gain social acceptance. It's wanting to gain some attraction. And in that situation, we're looking at the same thing, trying to change the environment. And sometimes if it's probably an adult Muslimah, sometimes that you want to, I guess, instill within them I would say the consistency in their and understanding their aqidah. Usually it's a misconception, it's a shahwa right there, and get them, I guess, connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to let them feel that I can be of a person of faith, and at the same time give them some perhaps areas that this can be a halal area of attraction. Perhaps, maybe she's trying to get married, so there's a certain level of probably exposing certain things to a certain limit, to probably wanting to get married, to probably wanting to get some kind of an attraction. How much of that is allowed? So I guess also learn about that, teach her about that, and at the same time probably teach her the parameters and connect her with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are actually key. The names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are key because you're redirecting how you view yourself, in how you view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His powers, and at the same time, of course, connecting with al-maut. كفى بالموت واعظا. Remembering death is key, because key in remembering death in itself, it just takes away our lust for everything. هدم اللذات. Takes away our lust for everything, and it puts it on a different level. I hope I answered that one. Sister Umayya, you want to say something, dear?
Yeah, assalamu
Yes,
alaikum.
Jasa.
وإياكم.
Yeah, can you please show me the upper part of this page? I miss half of the hadith you speak about it. It's من لا يواسيك في نفسك ولا يرفعك في دينك.
Oh, the that I said I was going to review its authenticity.
Yeah, I'm wondering why I don't have these papers.
I still didn't update your copy. Yeah, I'll update your copy, inshallah. I keep updating the copy, and yeah, I might actually update this copy even after I would review whether it's authentic or not. But inshallah, I'll update it and see how authentic is it. But I absolutely, I guess, even if it's not a hadith, I loved how it was coming in with a certain wisdom. So I don't know if it's a marfu' mawquf. I still have to research that one, but I came across it and I just had to include it. But inshallah, I'll review it.
So it's good to ask this question to make sure that this hadith is a hadith or something يعني.
It was Rawah ibn al-Mubarak. I have to, like I said, I would have to see mawquf, marfu'. I still have to research it.
Sorry, I'm not mean the one you have it now, but I usually long time hear about these things. 10 من يرفعك في الله حاله ويدلك على الله مقاله. Did you hear this hadith or something?
Let me look into it. Send it to me and I'll research that. I'll research that, inshallah. I don't think it's a hadith. It doesn't sound like a hadith. That's why I'm even skeptic about this one. I don't think it's a hadith. The wording is more sounding like a wording of probably one of the Salihin, maybe Ahnaf ibn Qais, maybe one of those Salihin. It doesn't sound like a hadith,
Yeah.
but I would have to, don't take my word for it. I would have to research that to see who really said that. I doubt it's a hadith. Absolutely doubt it. Doesn't sound like a hadith whatsoever.
Yeah, looks like advice.
Right. It looks like more of an advice. It looks like more of, Ahnaf ibn Qais, Fudail ibn Iyad, I don't know, Muhammad Sulaiman ibn Yasar, one of those people. That's what it really sounds like. Or probably Ibn al-Qayyim, Ibn al-Jawzi, but definitely not a hadith. But I'll look into it despite, so don't take my word for it.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair.
So this is it. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow with our tafsir. And of course, tomorrow with our tafsir, we're going to be starting a new ayah, everybody. So looking forward to that, because we're going to be doing, I guess, the way, and we're going to do the whole page and then take it into scrutiny. Remember how we do that? So looking forward to it. Stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Oh, Arwa, you want to say something, dear? Sorry about that. Or did she say it already? Okay. I think she said.
No, sorry.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right.
Thanks so much.
وإياكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك